welcome to this series of lectures on modern European history. And of the several things that we have discussed earlier, this time around we are going to talk about the Vienna Settlement, which is said to have happened around 1814, 1815, and this has largely to do with the post-Napoleonic period. Now, we have so far discussed about the European history and French history also, in particular with reference to the French Revolution, the emergence of or the rise of Napoleon, Napoleonic Empire, the progressive changes that he brought about, his positives, negatives with reference to what subsequently happened in 19th century Europe, because merely by being the part of Napoleonic Empire, however brief it might have lasted, it certainly gave quite a few areas of Europe the opportunity to see at work some of the principles that were introduced in modern Europe for the first time in these areas outside France. You have the rule of law, you have bureaucracy, modern bureaucracy served by people who were selected by merit and not on account of their belonging to a particular aristocratic or privileged families, and several other things that were introduced with reference to these areas being part of Napoleonic Empire. So, all these things we have discussed. We also discussed earlier that to what extent can we regard Napoleon or Napoleonic period as the child of the revolution, or to what extent did we find Napoleon straying away from the avowed principles and ideals of the French Revolution. Whatever might have been the case, we discussed that he comes out as a pragmatic person, reaching out to church, working out some settlement that allowed the bourgeoisie or the middle class at that point of time to make use of the confiscated land of the church that had been carried out during the revolution and so forth. Now, overall, the picture that we get up to 1814, up to the defeat of Napoleon, is that of some kind of a reversal from the ancient regime to modern regime of democracy, republicanism, bureaucracy, rule of law, and so forth. The privileged sections of society during the feudal times or the ancient regime were finding it difficult to have their access to the levers of political power till around Napoleonic period. But be it the French Revolution, be it the Napoleonic period, somehow they had perhaps not led to the unfolding of the imagery with which, or the blueprint with which, modernity, democracy, republicanism, citizenship, rule of law, etc. had begun. And in our discussion, in our earlier discussion, we have alluded to it, that constitutions were written in France, but they could very conveniently be ignored. Elections were held in France, at times really genuine elections also, yet the consequences that flew out of these elections were not always as per what they should have been, because several ways and means were resorted to circumvent the mandate of the elections, and it is the privileged sections of the society. When I say privilege, don't mistake it by thinking of the old aristocracy, but maybe even the nouveau riches, right? Those who had acquired wealth in their own lifetime. They were not traditionally rich. Nevertheless, they were the ones who were calling the shots during this period. Now, the point is that this progressive change that was marked ever since 1789 seems to have come to an end around 1814 with the defeat of Napoleon. And the general mood in Europe, because this conference was attended by dignitaries from almost all the countries, all the principalities of ruling houses of Europe, and the general mood was that let's restore the order back. Let's put the political pendulum back to pre-1789 times. At least there will be some order. The kind of chaotic changes, unpredictable changes that the revolution had marked in France was something that had perhaps not given a very good picture of what modernity entailed. In ultimate analysis, it is this very alternative that won the battle. But at around this point of time, you will find that there is an effort on part of the leaders of Europe to restore monarchy, to restore the political position and the legitimacy of ruling over a particular territory to those ruling houses who were in power before 1789, before the French Revolution had begun. Even this arrangement that the Vienna Settlement worked out did not last long, because as I have repeatedly told you in my earlier interaction, that it is not only the political aspirations generated through the French Revolution that were at work, but the society and economy of Europe was also getting transformed on several other quarters, say the Industrial Revolution. The changes brought at behest of the revolution had also led to quite a few change that were not always articulated politically and that were not audible at this point of time, but if you look at it from long-term perspective, they had completely been transforming the social and economic landscape of Europe as well, and that had its ramifications on the politics of Europe too. But for the next 15-20 years for sure, conservatism was back. Radicalism, or you can say republicanism, or whatever alternative with which the revolution had begun, was at a low key. This is not to say that they had completely been wiped out from the political map of Europe. There were pockets of unrest that went on, and ultimately by the time you reach 1848 or so, or for that matter even 1830, you find that the settlement that was worked out to restore aristocracy, to restore monarchy, to restore the old order was also proving to be not viable in the face of the transformations that were happening or that had already happened. So, let's now begin talking about the participation, the, you can say, vision of the participants, the dominant participants of this settlement, and the sheer fact that France was the vanquished power here and Russia was the conqueror. Russia had emerged as the victor, right? So, this is about the period subsequent to the defeat of Napoleon. The European powers met at the Congress of Vienna. This was 1814. they obviously met with the objective of guaranteeing international tranquility and establishing permanent peace. Remember, all through the Napoleonic times, or even the period prior to it, when French Revolution was happening in France and its ramifications were very much visible or audible in other areas, it was creating a lot of anxiety amongst the other monarchies that something like this can even happen in their areas, in their principalities. So they were little fearful of the kind of radical change that the revolution had marked. So they were attempting to discredit the revolution and were trying to work out some kind of a peace, some kind of an arrangement where monarchy is restored in the name of establishing peace, order and international tranquility. So that is the pretense, or that's the optics that this revolution had created. However, from within, it's very visible that the victors were also seen pushing for their demands for new territories. So it was not with some kind of a renunciatory foresight, statesmanly foresight, that all these dignitaries had participated post the defeat of Napoleon. The territorial hunger, the territorial lust were already in operation even during this negotiation. So as you can see on your slide, it was attended by dignitaries from almost all the principalities of Europe. That way it was very well represented Congress. The Tsar of Russia, Alexander I, the Emperor of Austria, the kings of Prussia, Denmark, Bavaria, Sweden, Württemberg, Britain, Talleyrand represented France. So it was very well participated, attended kind of a Congress. However, as I said towards the beginning of this lecture, that the major players were only a few. For example, the Tsar Alexander I, who had emerged victorious in the war against Napoleon, and also the Austrian diplomat Metternich. We will talk about the individual make of these two characters, Alexander I and Metternich, because it has some pertinence to what happened, what transpired in the Congress. And if you look at the personality of Alexander I, who was the Tsar of Russia and who had emerged victorious in the war against Napoleon, well, evidently he was a Tsar, and as the word itself goes, he was a dictator, absolutist in essence. Why I am using this word essence is because to get seen, he was little different. In terms of being seen to others, he was little different because his vocabulary was richly punctuated with Jacobin ideas, progressive ideas, even radical ideas. In fact, he had hired a Jacobin teacher to teach him about the times, about the politics of the time, and obviously he was very much aware of Jacobin ideas, and even inadvertently his language carried quite a few ideas which to a lay person would have looked like being coming from some progressive leader. The fact of the matter was, he was a Tsar, right? So on the one hand, genetics worked to inform him about the absolutist authority that he inherited from his father, Tsar Paul. However, his verbalizations about liberty, about enlightenment, almost frightened the conservatives into suspecting an all-powerful Russia for an all-powerful France, because that is precisely what had happened with reference to Napoleon. We have seen earlier, while talking about Napoleon, as to how he presented a mixed bag of the legacy of the revolution and his own quest to create an empire. So quite a few monarchies in Europe thought that, well, it should not be that now that Russia has defeated France, then the Napoleonic Empire is substituted by Russian Empire under Alexander I. And if you go by the vocabulary of Alexander I, he also sounded to be very modern. He also sounded to be abreast of Jacobin ideas and so forth. So that was a problem. That was something which was palpably present in the mood of the Congress, particularly the way these leaders perceived Alexander the First. The other biggie at the Congress, of course, as I mentioned, was Metternich from Austria, coming from aristocratic background. He hated political innovation and also Russia. He was quite disposed against Russia, and this was not only with reference to the times of the Congress, but even before that, we see that Metternich was instrumental in ensuring that Napoleon and Alexander First don't come together. He actually fomented discord between the two. Whenever they got the chance to come together, he made sure that they don't come together. Obviously, he had Austria, he had the interest of Austria foremost in his mind, and that's the way he was approaching the international politics or European politics at this point of time. He had seen the mob violence during the French Revolution, the stories of the Reign of Terror, the excesses carried out during the Reign of Terror during the French Revolution 1792-95 period, and obviously he was ill disposed towards any arrangement of that kind. So as I said, that he had also fomented discord between Alexander I and Napoleon. In his personal make, he was an admirer of spiders, because as you can see on your slide, because he said these spiders are always busy arranging their houses with greatest of neatness in the world. And when we use this statement of Metternich, please keep in mind, keeping house in order here alludes to his Austrian interest. So he would always work it out very neatly as to what is good for Austria, and that's how he would approach the European politics. Obviously, this is not a very good way, or this is not a very statesmanly way to weave international politics in a statesmanly way, in a futuristic way, or in an idealistic way. But that's how he was, and therefore he ended up favoring moderate terms for France. France was the vanquished power, yet Metternich does not want France to be completely pulverized. Why does he not want that? Is because he wants a formidable country to be present to pose some kind of resistance to Russia, to Russian influence. So he was not in favor of completely distributing the territories of France amongst the victors. So much so that Metternich even favored restoration of Napoleon as the Emperor of France under the overlordship of Habsburg monarchy, which was the ruling power in his own country, Austria. And we all know that Napoleon had family connection with Habsburg family as well, and there were quite a few emigres from France who had moved to Austria during the revolution, finding shelter over there, and they were carrying out their support to counter revolution from there only. So, there is that soft corner that Metternich displayed for France, despite France being the vanquished power. So, this, as you can see on your slide, this is the photograph of the Congress of Vienna, and let's come to the deliberations of this Congress. And as you can see on your slide, legitimacy is the key word here. And when we say legitimacy, don't go by the literal meaning of the term. Legitimacy, the way it was used by different participants at the Congress. In fact, it ended up being the basic guiding idea at the Congress. Initially, or I would say originally, it was Talleyrand, the French representative at the Congress, who used legitimacy as a device for protecting France against any possible drastic punishment by its conquerors. But it was Metternich who actually started using it as a convenient expression of general policy of reaction. What do we mean by this? This is like when you are in a new situation, say an empire created by Napoleon is gone. Now you have to work out what you will do to these territories in future. The man in power is a defeated person. He can no more be entrusted with the responsibility of carrying out rule or administration in these areas. So it has to be redone. Now, how do you do this? So this legitimacy, which is like some kind of a principle on which you will work out the territorial arrangement or the political arrangement of Europe after the defeat of Napoleon, rested on. Now, who should be entrusted with the responsibility to rule and over what areas? And as I said, that the mood momentarily at least was like getting fed up with the chaotic circumstances that the revolution and Napoleon's empire had led to. So, Metternich and other leaders at the Congress thought that it is better to set the pendulum back to pre-1789 position, and therefore it in effect meant that the responsibility to rule should be vested with the rulers who were ruling over a particular area in different parts of Europe before 1789. And so it was the Bourbon ruler Louis XVIII from the same line of kings ruling lineage, who was recognized as the legitimate sovereign of France. Bourbon rulers were also confirmed in Spain and the two Sicilies. Obviously, France was the vanquished power, the defeated power, so it had to pay an indemnity of 700 million francs to the Allies. The Dutch Republic, which was conquered by France in 1795, was restored as the Kingdom of the Netherlands under the House of Orange. Belgium was added to it to make it a little more powerful deterrent for any future French aggression. The German left bank of Rhine was ceded to Prussia. Austria was established as a major power in northern Italy. A loose German confederation, which in effect reduced 300 principalities to merely 39. And here it is not only putting the pendulum back to 1789 position, but there is some kind of a pragmatic thinking done over here, and territorial quest is satiated with this arrangement. And this German confederation was to be created under the honorary presidency of Austria. Metternich allied with Talleyrand and the British representative at the Congress against any Russian and Prussian Polish faction deal. As a compromise, Russia, as I said, that he was ill disposed towards Russia. So, as a compromise, Russia got a major portion of Poland, all right, and also Prussia got a portion of Saxony. Britain, as war compensation, got the French colonies of South Africa, South America, and Ceylon. But the Congress overall turned its back on the three powerful legacies of Napoleonic era, that is liberty, equality, and nationality. The dominant emotion at the Congress rather was that of fear, to ensure that the internal settlement is not overthrown. Hence, the principle of legitimacy ensured that the balance and stability mattered the most in the Congress. So, that is it about the Vienna Congress in 1814, 1815, and in the next lecture we shall see how formidable, how durable this arrangement proved to be in the politics of Europe. Thank you.